I inherited my aunt's cabin. She didn't tell me what lives in the basement. I was eating cold pizza from 2 days ago when my phone buzzed. The cheese had gone rubbery and the pepperoni had curled into sad little cups of grease. But when you're staring at a bank statement showing negative $412, you stop caring about the quality of your meals. You just eat whatever keeps you alive until the next paycheck. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. Area code I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail. Nothing good ever comes from unknown calls near midnight. Debt collectors, scammers, wrong numbers from drunk people looking for someone named Steve. But I had sent out 17 job applications that week, and desperation makes you do stupid things. Maybe some company in a different time zone was calling about an interview. Maybe my luck was finally about to change. I wiped the pizza grease on my sweatpants and answered. Ryan Palmer. The voice was female professional, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who wore suits and sat in offices with actual windows. Yeah, that's me. My name is Linda Chen. I'm an attorney handling the estate of Helen Marsh. I believe she was your aunt. I had to think about that for a second. Aunt Helen. The name drifted up from somewhere deep in my memory like a bubble rising through murky water. I remembered her from maybe 2 or 3 Christmas dinners when I was a kid. Quiet woman who wore flannel shirts and smelled like wood smoke. Always sat in the corner away from everyone else. Didn't say much. When she did speak, her voice was soft, almost apologetic, like she was sorry for taking up space in the room. Right, yeah, she was my dad's sister. I paused. Is she okay? I'm sorry to tell you she passed away 6 weeks ago. She had been in a nursing home in Albany for the past 14 months. I set down my pizza slice. The fluorescent light in my kitchen flickered the way it always did, casting everything in that sickly yellow-green glow that made my studio apartment look even more depressing than usual. Oh, I didn't know that. It was the truth. My father died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal, 7 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. After that, my mother cut off contact with his side of the family. She said it was to start fresh, but I knew the real reason. She had never liked the Palmers. Always said they were strange. Kept too many secrets. Lived in places too far from civilization. Looking back now, I wonder if she knew something I didn't. Miss Marsh named you as her sole beneficiary, Linda Chen continued. Beneficiary of what? A cabin in 40 acres near Bear Lake in the Adirondacks? Lakefront property quite isolated. My heart did something funny in my chest. Lakefront property, 40 acres. I didn't know much about real estate values, but I knew enough to understand that land near water in upstate New York wasn't cheap. What's it worth? Difficult to say without a professional appraisal. The cabin has been vacant for over a year, and it's fairly remote. No cell service for the last 10 miles. But lakefront property in that area typically runs anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000, depending on condition and accessibility. $500,000. The number echoed in my skull like a bell. $500,000. That would wipe out my student loans, all $87,000 of them. The debt that kept me awake at night, that forced me to work the graveyard shift at a call center, answering complaints about cable bills from angry people who didn't understand why their HBO wasn't working. $500,000 could change everything. I'll come see it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course, I'll email you the address and directions. But I should warn you, it's quite isolated, and Linda Chen hesitated. It was a small pause, barely noticeable, but after years of talking to strangers on the phone for 8 hours a night, I had learned to hear the things people didn't say. And what? Miss Marsh left some personal notes. A sealed envelope with instructions that it should only be opened when you're inside the cabin. I'll include it with the paperwork. Okay? There's one more thing. Another pause. In her will, Miss Marsh wrote a line that she specifically requested I read to you. What line? Linda Chen's voice changed slightly. More careful now, like she was reading something she didn't entirely understand. Don't let it go hungry. and never open the door after midnight. A cold sensation crawled up my spine, even though my apartment was stuffy and warm from the broken air conditioning. Did she explain what that means? No, that's all she wrote. I assume she had a pet, or perhaps she was referring to some wildlife that comes around the property. Elderly people sometimes develop unusual attachments to things. Yeah, I said. Probably a dog or something. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. You don't put instructions about feeding a dog in your last will and testament. You don't tell people to never open the door after midnight because of a cat. Something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. That night I lay in bed staring at the water stain on my ceiling, the one that looked vaguely like Abraham Lincoln if you squinted hard enough and tried to remember everything I knew about Aunt Helen. It wasn't much. She was my father's younger sister, 12 years his junior. They weren't close. I remembered asking my dad once why Aunt Helen always looked so sad, and he had given me a strange look before answering. She lost something precious to her a long time ago, something she'll never get back. Sometimes people don't recover from losses like that. I didn't ask what she had lost. Kids don't ask those kinds of questions. They accept the world as it is and move on to the next thing that catches their attention. But now, lying in the dark with the sounds of the city bleeding through my thin walls, I found myself wondering, what had Aunt Helen lost? And why had she left everything to me, a nephew she barely knew, instead of someone closer to her? The ceiling offered no answers. Neither did the traffic noise outside or the muffled television from the apartment next door or the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the night. 3 days later, I was driving north. My Honda Civic was 12 years old, had 200,000 miles on it, and made a concerning rattling sound whenever I went over 50. But it still ran, which was more than I could say for my finances. I had filled the tank with the last of my checking account, packed a cooler full of gas station sandwiches, and pointed the car toward the Adirondacks. The further I got from the city, the better I felt. October in upstate New York was something else entirely. The trees had turned every shade of fire. Maples burned crimson against the blue sky. Oaks glowed orange and gold. The air coming through my cracked window smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke and something clean and cold that I couldn't name. I had always liked fall better than summer. Less pressure to be happy about everything. Summer demanded joy. It demanded beach trips and barbecues and forced smiles at family gatherings. Fall just let you exist. Let you be melancholy if you wanted. Let you sit with your thoughts without apologizing for them. The GPS took me off the interstate and onto state routes that got narrower and emptier as I drove. 2-lane highways became winding county roads. County roads became dirt paths with grass growing down the middle. The kind of roads that made you wonder if you had taken a wrong turn somewhere and were now headed toward the edge of the world. Cell service died about 2 hours before I reached the cabin. The bars on my phone dropped from 3 to 2 to 1 to nothing, and then the screen just showed no service in that accusing little font that meant I was truly alone. I passed maybe 5 houses in the last hour. All of them looked like they had been there since the Eisenhower administration. Metal roofs gone orange with rust. Wood piles stacked against the sides like fortifications. Old trucks and driveways that hadn't moved in years. Dogs in yards that watched my car go by with tired eyes but didn't bother barking. These were people who had chosen to live apart from the world. People who didn't want neighbors or visitors or anyone asking questions about their business. I understood the appeal. Sometimes the world felt like too much. Sometimes you just wanted to disappear into the trees and never come back. The final turn was onto something called Timber Creek Road, which wasn't really a road so much as 2 tire tracks with a gravel strip between them. My Honda scraped bottom twice on the deeper ruts, metal grinding against rock in a way that made me wince, but I kept going. According to Linda Chen's directions, I was close. I smelled the lake before I saw it. That clean, cold water smell mixed with pine needles and something else. Wood smoke. Someone's chimney somewhere, though I couldn't see any houses. Just trees and more trees pressing in on both sides of the road like they were trying to reclaim the path for themselves. Then the forest opened up and Bear Lake spread out before me like a sheet of hammered silver. It was bigger than I had expected. Maybe half a mile across with dark water that reflected the gray October sky like a mirror. The far shore was nothing but forest climbing up into hills that disappeared into low-hanging clouds. No houses visible anywhere, no boats, no docks, no signs of human life at all. Just water and trees and the sound of my engine echoing off the hills. The cabin sat about 50 yards back from the water's edge, tucked between two massive pine trees that must have been growing there for 100 years. Their trunks were thick enough that I couldn't have wrapped my arms around them, and their branches reached out over the cabin's roof like protective arms, or possessive ones. It was hard to tell. The building itself was bigger than I had imagined. 2 stories with a stone chimney rising from one end, and a wraparound porch that sagged noticeably on the left side like someone had forgotten to replace a support beam a few decades ago. Most of the windows were boarded up with plywood that had gone gray from weather and age. The front door was solid wood painted green at some point in the distant past, now faded and peeling. The metal roof looked newer than the rest of the place, probably replaced within the last 20 years. Still holding up against the elements while everything else slowly surrendered to time. I parked next to what used to be a garden but was now just weeds, and the skeleton of a fence that deer had probably been jumping for years. When I turned off the engine, the silence hit me like a physical force. No traffic, no sirens, no television through thin walls, no neighbors arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Just wind through pine branches and water lapping against the rocky shore and the occasional call of a bird I didn't recognize. Some people would have found it peaceful. I found it unsettling. Silence that deep felt less like an absence of sound and more like the presence of something else, something listening. The key was under a flower pot by the front steps, exactly where Linda Chen said it would be. Old brass key that looked like it belonged to a different century. Heavy in my palm. The kind of key that meant business. I stood on the porch for a long moment before putting it in the lock. The wood beneath my feet creaked. The wind picked up, rustling through the pines, making them whisper to each other in a language I couldn't understand. Every small town has its secrets. Every family has its silence. I had driven 5 hours into the wilderness to claim my inheritance, and for the first time, I wondered what I was really inheriting. The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty house like a warning. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, stale air, and something else underneath something I couldn't identify. Not unpleasant exactly, just old, like opening a book that had been sitting on a shelf for decades. Like disturbing air that hadn't moved in a very long time. But there was another layer beneath that, something organic, something alive. I told myself it was probably mice. Old cabin empty for over a year. Rodents would have moved in. Maybe something had died in the walls. It happened all the time in places like this. I found the light switch and flicked it. Nothing. Right. Linda had mentioned the power was shut off. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped inside. The main room was bigger than my entire apartment back in the city. Hardwood floors under about an inch of dust. Stone fireplace that looked like it could heat the whole house if you fed it enough wood. Kitchen along one wall with appliances that were probably older than me but looked like they would run forever if you plugged them in. But it was the walls that made me stop and stare. Mounted deer heads everywhere. 8 of them, maybe 10, all with impressive antlers catching the beam of my flashlight. A black bear head over the fireplace, mouth open, teeth bared, glass eyes gleaming in the dark, and covering every available inch of wall space between the trophy's dozens of framed photographs. I moved closer to look at them, all hunting photos. Helen, with various people in camouflage gear, standing over dead deer, holding up strings of fish, posing with rifles. The photos spanned what looked like 40 years or more. Helen aging from a young woman in her 30s to the gray-haired person I remembered from those long-ago Christmas dinners. She looked happy in most of them, really happy in a way I had never seen during those brief family visits. Like this place was where she actually lived and everything else was just time she had to spend somewhere else. In some of the older photos, there was a boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with dark hair and a shy smile. He appeared in several pictures always, with Helen always looking at the camera with that mixture of excitement and uncertainty that kids have when they're trying something new. I wondered who he was. A nephew from another branch of the family, maybe? Someone who used to visit before whatever happened that made Helen so sad. I spent the next few hours going through everything. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, all of them filled with more hunting photos, more gearboxes of ammunition in the closets, rifles and gun safes I couldn't open without the combinations, fishing rods and tackle boxes and waders hanging in what used to be a coat closet. Helen had been serious about her hunting, more serious than anyone I had ever known. The basement was more of the same, but different in a way that made my skin prickle. 3 industrial freezers lined up against one wall. Big commercial units, the kind you see in restaurants. I opened one and the smell of rotted meat hit me like a fist. Venison, probably. Gone bad months ago when the power was cut. I gagged and slammed the lid shut, but as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Behind the freezers, almost completely hidden in the shadows, there was a door. Not a regular door. Steel. Painted dark green, with 3 deadbolts running down the side. Industrial deadbolts, the kind you see on bank vaults or secure storage facilities, and there was a metal plate bolted over where the door handle should have been. I stood there staring at it for a long time. The beam of my flashlight played across the surface, picking up scratches in the paint dents in the metal. Old damage. Years of it, maybe decades. What the hell was behind that door? I didn't go any closer. Something in my gut told me not to. Something primal, the same instinct that tells you not to stick your hand into dark holes or turn your back on strange noises in the woods. Instead, I went back upstairs, sat on the porch as the sun started setting over Bear Lake, and pulled out my phone to add up the numbers. Even being conservative, the cabin would sell for at least $300,000. Maybe more to the right buyer who wanted genuine isolation and didn't mind the drive. The guns alone were probably worth $20,000 if they were legal and registered. The mounted heads would sell to the right collector. The furniture was solid wood, handmade stuff that antique dealers would fight over. After paying off my loans and covering some repairs, I would still have enough left over to put a down payment on my own place. Maybe even enough to quit the temp jobs and finish my degree without working nights. For the first time in years, I felt like things might actually work out. I made sure to engage the deadbolt on the front door that night, testing the handle twice to confirm it wouldn't turn. Old habit from years of city living. Then I settled onto the couch with my sleeping bag pulled up to my chin, thinking about $300,000 and the new life waiting for me once I sold this place. The scratching started at 12:07 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone when I heard it. Soft at first, like fingernails on drywall, coming from somewhere behind the kitchen wall. Mice, I told myself. Old cabin, empty for months. Of course there would be rodents. But then the sound moved, slowly, deliberately, along the wall toward the living room, past the fireplace, across the ceiling above my head, and then it stopped right above where I was lying. Silence. I held my breath, counting heartbeats instead of seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nothing. I shifted slightly on the couch. The scratching erupted again immediately right in the wall behind my head, like it had been waiting to see if I would move. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head like a child and told myself it was just an animal, a raccoon maybe, or a squirrel. Something with claws that had gotten into the walls and was looking for a way out. But animals don't stop when you stop. Animals don't wait in silence right above your head like they're listening. Animals don't scratch in patterns that sound almost like words. And animals don't whisper your name at 3 in the morning. I heard it faint, muffled by wood and plaster and decades of secrets. Ryan, just once. Then silence. Then the scratching resumed, moving away from me, now traveling through the walls toward the basement, toward that steel door with the 3 deadbolts. I watched the ceiling until dawn painted it gray. The morning light transformed the cabin into something almost ordinary. Dust motes drifted through pale beams of sunshine. The mounted deer heads stared at nothing with their glass eyes. Outside, birds sang in the pines like nothing unusual had happened during the night. I told myself I had imagined everything. That's what you do when something impossible happens. You rationalize, you explain it away. You build little walls of logic around the dark thing in your mind and pretend it isn't there. The scratching was mice or squirrels or some animal I had never encountered before. The whisper was just wind through old walls, my sleep-deprived brain turning random noise into patterns that weren't there. The human mind is desperate for explanations. It will twist itself into knots to avoid accepting that some things simply cannot be explained. I made coffee with trembling hands. Instant stuff mixed with bottled water heated on the camping stove. The familiar ritual helped. Pour the water, stir the powder, wait for it to cool enough to drink. Normal actions in an abnormal situation. That's when I noticed the kitchen door. It stood wide open, morning breeze, carrying the scent of pine needles and lake water and something else underneath. Something musky and wrong. I stared at that door coffee, forgotten in my hand. The deadbolt was turned to the unlocked position. The handle, too. Both of them disengaged as if someone had carefully, deliberately opened every lock before pushing the door wide. I remembered engaging those locks the night before. Remembered the solid click of metal sliding into place. Remembered testing the handle to make sure it held. Those weren't the kind of actions you imagined or misremembered. My stomach dropped when I looked down at the threshold. Tracks led from the open doorway across the kitchen floor toward the basement stairs. Fresh tracks pressed into the thin layer of dust on the hardwood. They weren't footprints in any normal sense, too elongated, too narrow. The front impression showed distinct finger-like marks, as if something had walked on its hands and knees. The rear prints were almost human in shape, but stretched and distorted. I followed them with my eyes, not daring to move closer. They led to the basement door, which was now standing slightly ajar. I had left that door closed yesterday, closed and avoided not wanting to confront whatever secrets Helen had kept hidden below. But now a gap of maybe 6 inches showed between the door and its frame, and cold air drifted up carrying that thick animal musk. Something had come up from the basement during the night, walked through my kitchen, opened the back door, and then returned to the darkness below. The tracks only led one direction, into the cabin, toward the basement stairs. Whatever had made them was still down there. The scratching started again around noon. I had been trying to distract myself upstairs, cataloging items in the bedrooms, making lists of things that might be valuable. Normal tasks, practical tasks. The kind of work that kept your hands busy and your mind focused on something other than impossible things. The sound cut through my concentration like a knife. Same scratching I'd heard the night before, but different now, louder, more aggressive, more purposeful, like something that had grown frustrated with waiting. I stood perfectly still in Helen's bedroom, head tilted, tracking the sound. It started behind the wall near the closet, a rapid scraping noise like claws on wood. Then it moved, traveling along the wall toward the hallway, following what had to be a path inside the structure itself. I followed, stepping carefully, trying not to make any sound. The scratching kept pace inside the wall to my left. When I stopped, it stopped. When I took another step, it resumed. I tested it. Moved to the right side of the hallway. The scratching shifted, traveling across the ceiling to position itself nearest to my new location. Moved back to the left. It followed. Walked to the end of the hall and pressed myself into the corner. Within seconds, the sound had repositioned itself directly behind me, separated from my back by nothing but plaster and wooden studs. It was tracking me, following my movements, somehow sensing exactly where I was at any given moment and adjusting its position to stay as close as possible. Not an animal. No animal behaved like this. Something else, something that wanted me to know it was there. The sound stopped abruptly. Then, from somewhere below, a voice, small, hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in years trying to remember how words worked. "I know you're there, Ryan." My blood turned to ice water. "I can always tell where you are. I can smell you, hear your heartbeat through the walls." I didn't move, didn't breathe. "You smell like her, like Helen, like family." The word cracked in the middle, dissolving into something that might have been a sob. Then silence. I stayed in that corner for a long time, but nothing more came. Eventually the scratching resumed and traveled back down through the walls toward the basement. I had to get out of this cabin. Not permanently, not yet. But I needed answers. I needed to talk to someone who knew this place. Earl Dawson, the neighbor Linda Chen had mentioned, 2 miles down the mountain road. Lived here for decades, knew Helen fairly well. Maybe he knew her secrets too. The drive took about 10 minutes. Earl's mailbox stood at the junction where his driveway met Timber Creek Road. Blue paint faded by weather, the name Dawson visible in peeling white letters. His house was single-story with a metal roof. A woodshed out back already stacked for winter. 2 pickup trucks in the driveway. A dog started barking before I even got out of my car. The man who answered the door matched his surroundings. Mid-60s, silver hair, weathered face, hands calloused from decades of work. Sharp, watchful eyes. "You're Ryan," he said before I could introduce myself. "Helen's nephew. Linda called to let me know you'd be coming up." "That's right. Earl Dawson." "That's me." He pushed the screen door open. "You've got a look about you, like you've seen something that doesn't make sense." I laughed without humor. "You could say that. Come on in. I've been expecting this conversation for over a year now." His kitchen was simple. Well-worn furniture, photographs on walls, a wood stove in the corner. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking and sat across from me at the small table. "Tell me what's been happening up there." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "There's something living in the cabin, in the walls, I think. Maybe in the basement. It makes sounds at night, scratching, following me room to room." Earl nodded like this confirmed something he had suspected. "It knows exactly where I am at all times," I continued. "And last night I saw fingers reaching under the basement door. Long gray fingers with too many joints." I expected him to laugh, to tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he set down his coffee and looked at me with something like pity. "Helen managed to keep that thing quiet for over 25 years. Fed it. Contained it. Made sure it never got out where it could hurt anyone." He shook his head. "But she's been gone for 14 months now. 14 months without anyone to take care of it. Take care of what's in that basement." He was quiet for a long moment. "You know about Tommy Marsh?" The name hit me like a punch. The dark-haired boy in Helen's photographs. Linda mentioned him. Said he was listed as next of kin, but they couldn't locate him. Earl laughed bitterly. "No, I don't suppose they could." He walked to the window, looking out at the forest. "Tommy was Helen's nephew, her brother's boy. Spent summers here when he was young. Good kid. Quiet. Loved the outdoors." What happened to him? Summer of 1998. Tommy was 12. There was a Boy Scout troop camping near the lake, and Helen let him join for a few days. Second night, Tommy disappeared. Just vanished from his tent. They searched. For 3 weeks, State Police Forest Service volunteers, dogs, helicopters. They combed every inch of these mountains and never found him. Earl turned to look at me. Oh, they never found him. But Helen did. The words hung in the air. She found him about a week after the search teams gave up. Never told anyone exactly where or how. But I saw her that night dragging something toward her cabin in the dark. Something that was still moving. Something... that's the right word for it. By the time Helen found Tommy, he wasn't a boy anymore. Not entirely. Something had happened to him in those woods. Something that changed him into... I don't know what to call it. I thought about the fingers under the basement door. The voice that sounded like a child but couldn't possibly be one. She kept him in the basement. It wasn't a question. Earl nodded. Built a room down there. Concrete walls, steel door, 3 industrial locks. Kept him contained. Kept him fed. Fed him how? How do you think all those hunting photos on her walls? Helen became the best hunter in 3 counties after she found Tommy. Brought home deer after deer, and everyone figured she was just dedicated to the sport. He laughed bitterly. She barely ate meat herself. All those deer went straight into that basement, straight to whatever Tommy had become. You knew about this all these years. Suspected. Never confirmed. Helen kept her secrets close. Earl sat back down. But I'm not blind. I heard sounds from that cabin some nights. Saw things that didn't add up. Why didn't you do anything? Help how? That thing in the basement wasn't something that could be handled by normal means. Helen tried everything to fix him. Nothing worked, so she just kept him for 25 years. What else could she do? She couldn't destroy what was left of her nephew. So she contained him, fed him, made sure the hunger was satisfied so he wouldn't hunt for himself. The hunger. He said it like a proper noun. What happened to him out there, Earl? He was quiet for a long time. These mountains are old, Ryan. The native people who lived here had stories about things in the deep woods, things that had been here since before humans walked this land. They said if you went too far into the wild places, if you got lost and desperate enough, you might encounter something that would offer you a deal, survival in exchange for your humanity. You think Tommy made some kind of deal. I think a scared, starving 12-year-old lost for 3 days might have been desperate enough to accept help from anything that offered. And whatever helped him survive didn't do it out of kindness. Earl handed me a paper bag from his cabinet, several pounds of ground beef inside. For now, feed it. That's what Helen did. It might buy you time to figure out your next move. I took the bag. That thing in the basement, Earl said quietly. Whatever else it is, it's still connected to Tommy somehow. Helen believed that. Believed she was protecting what was left of her nephew. He put a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to stay, but if you walk away, that thing will get loose eventually. And when it does, people will die. I drove back as the sun descended toward the hills, the bag of meat on the passenger seat like an accusation. Inside the cabin, the scratching intensified the moment I entered. Frantic scraping that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It knew I was back, and it was hungry. I walked toward the basement stairs. The door was still ajar, darkness beyond. I brought you something, I said into the blackness. The scratching stopped instantly. I'm going to throw it down the stairs. That's how this works, right? Silence. Then that voice drifting up. Yes, Helen always brought me food. She took care of me. She's gone now, but I'm here. Soft and small and impossibly sad. Thank you, Ryan. I threw the packages of meat down into the darkness, heard them land, heard movement, heard sounds I tried not to think about. I closed the basement door and walked away. That night on the porch, I found a bottle of whiskey in Helen's cabinet and watched the stars appear over Bear Lake. The scratching had stopped after the feeding, but I knew it wouldn't last. I was going to have to make a decision. Stay or go. Accept the inheritance or walk away. Somewhere in that basement, something that used to be a 12-year-old boy was waiting to see what I would choose. The temporary peace lasted 3 days. I fell into something like a routine. Mornings spent cataloging the cabin's contents, Afternoons hunting in the woods behind the property. Learning the trails Helen must have walked thousands of times. Evenings on the porch watching the light fade over the lake and trying not to think about what was waiting below. Every 2 or 3 days I would take meat down to the basement door, throw it into the darkness, listen to the sounds of feeding, walk away. We had an arrangement, not friendship, not anything close to that, but a kind of truce. Then on the 4th night everything changed. I was lying on the couch around 11 when the scratching started again. But this time it was different, faster, more frantic, accompanied by a new sound, a wet rhythmic noise that might have been breathing or something worse. And then it stopped. Complete silence. I held my breath counting heartbeats. Something knocked on the basement door. 3 times. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock. Knock, then that voice. "Ryan, I need to show you something." I didn't respond. "Please, it's important. About Helen. About why she kept me." Against every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I found myself walking toward the basement stairs. The door stood slightly open, that familiar gap showing nothing but darkness. "In Helen's bedroom," the voice continued. "There's a journal, brown leather. She kept it on the nightstand. Read it, then you'll understand." I hesitated. "Please, Ryan, I know you're scared of me. I know what I've become, but there are things you need to know. Things Helen wanted you to know." I backed away from the basement door and went upstairs. The journal was exactly where the voice had said. Brown leather worn soft from years of handling. I took it to Helen's bed and began to read. The first pages were ordinary, hunting records dating back to 1985, dates, locations, kills, scientific precision. Then I reached October 1998, October 18th, 1998. Found him. God help me, I found him. October 19th, 1998. He's alive. Changed but alive. I don't know what to do. October 20th, 1998. Built a room in the basement. Steel door. 3 locks. He can't get out. He can't hurt anyone else. October 22nd, 1998. He's hungry. So hungry. Tried canned food, but he won't eat it. Only wants meat, raw meat. October 25th, 1998. Killed a deer today. Dragged it to his room. He ate everything, even the bones. My hands trembled as I turned pages. October 28th, 1998. He asks for more, always more. The hunger never stops. What happened to my boy? November 1st, 1998. It's still hungry. November 5th, 1998. I have to feed it. The same 2 phrases over and over, page after page, year after year. I flipped to the final entry dated just before Helen went into the nursing home. I can't do this anymore. I'm too old, too tired. The hunger's getting stronger and I'm getting weaker. Don't let it out. Whatever you do, don't let Tommy out. I closed the journal and sat there for a long time. 25 years. Helen had kept this secret for 25 years. Fed the hunger, maintained the containment, sacrificed everything to keep whatever Tommy had become from escaping into the world. And now that responsibility had passed to me. The next morning I went to town and bought bolt cutters. Heavy-duty ones that could handle industrial steel. The man at the hardware store didn't ask questions. I needed to see what was behind that door. Needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The basement was quiet when I descended the stairs, bolt cutters in hand. That steel door waited in the shadows behind the freezers. 3 deadbolts. Thousands of scratches covering the surface like wounds. I positioned the cutters around the first bolt and squeezed. Crack. The sound echoed off concrete walls. Behind the door something stirred. Second bolt. Crack. The stirring stopped. Whatever was in there was listening. Third bolt. Crack. For a moment nothing happened. Then slowly the door began to swing inward. The smell hit me first, like a zoo that hadn't been cleaned in months. Animal musk and old meat and something sweet and rotten underneath. I pressed my sleeve against my nose and forced myself to look. The room beyond was maybe 10 feet square. Concrete walls covered with scratches that went down to the rebar in places. 25 years of clawing at surfaces that wouldn't yield. The ceiling was scratched too, 8 feet up. The floor sloped toward a drain in the center, easier to clean after feedings. Bones scattered everywhere, mostly deer. Leg bones, rib cages, skulls with empty eye sockets. But mixed in were smaller bones, more delicate. Human finger bones. Part of a child's skull cracked along one side. In the far corner, a pile of rotted fabric. A backpack with a Boy Scout patch. Clothes sized for a 12-year-old. Tommy's clothes. I backed out of the room, heart pounding, and slammed the door shut. Stood there gasping, trying to process what I had seen. That night I learned what Tommy had become. I was on the couch around midnight when the sound started. Not scratching this time. Footsteps. On the roof. Heavy. Deliberate. Moving from the back of the cabin toward the front. Then something jumped down onto the porch. The boards creaked. Through the boarded windows I saw movement. A shadow passing across gaps where moonlight filtered through. The front door handle turned. Slowly. Testing. The deadbolt held. But I heard pressure against the door. Something pushing. The first impact nearly knocked me off the couch. Something had thrown itself against the door with tremendous force. The frame cracked. Another impact. The door bowed inward. A third. The top hinge tore partially free. Through the gap, fingers appeared. Long, gray, too many joints. They wrapped around the edge of the door and pulled. More fingers joined them. The door groaned. And through the widening gap, a face appeared. I will never forget that face. The basic structure was still human. Eyes, nose, mouth in the right places, but everything was wrong. Eyes too large, too round, reflecting my flashlight like a cat's. Nose flattened, nostrils flared wide. Mouth stretched too far, revealing rows of teeth that were sharp and jagged and far too numerous. Skin gray as concrete, stretched tight over bones in the wrong places. "Ryan," the voice came from that impossible mouth, still sounding like a child. "I found you." The door gave way. Tommy stood in the doorway. Maybe 6 feet tall, but proportions all wrong. Arms too long. Legs that moved in jerky, stuttering motions, wearing rags that might once have been clothes, so impossibly thin. Every bone visible through gray skin, a skeleton wrapped in paper kept alive by hunger alone. "You smell like her," he said, "like Helen, like family." I raised the hunting knife I had been sleeping with. It felt pathetic against something that had torn through solid oak. "Stay back." Tommy tilted his head, the motion too quick, too bird-like. "That won't work." She tried. Knives, guns, fire. Nothing works. He stepped closer. "I can't die, Ryan. The hunger won't let me. It keeps me alive." "What are you?" "I don't know anymore. I used to be a boy. Tommy, 12 years old. I like baseball and comic books." His voice cracked. "I got lost in the woods. 3 days. No food, no water. So hungry I couldn't think." He was closer now. Close enough that I could smell him. "I found something in those woods. Or it found me. It was hungry, too. Had been hungry for so long. When it touched me." He looked at his hands. Those long, gray fingers. "It showed me how to survive. All I had to do was feed it forever." "Feed it what?" "Everything. The hunger doesn't care. It just wants more." He was right in front of me now. Close enough to touch. Then he stopped. His nostrils flared, his head tilted. "Your family, I can smell it. The same blood." Something shifted in those terrible eyes. "She always said family was sacred. That family doesn't hurt family. It's the only rule I remember." Tommy stepped back. "I won't hurt you, Ryan. Your family." He looked around the cabin, at the photos on the walls, at the evidence of Helen's long years of isolation. "But I'm so hungry. If you don't feed me, the hunger will make me forget. It always does. It will eat away at me until there's nothing left but the need." He turned back to me, face twisted with grief and rage. "I need you to help me, the way she helped me. And if I refuse..." For a moment I saw something human in those monstrous features. A scared child lost and alone. "Then eventually I'll forget that you're family. And when that happens..." His mouth open, teeth gleaming in moonlight. "I'll be so sorry. But I won't be able to stop." He turned and walked toward the tree line. At the edge of the forest, he stopped. "I'll be back tomorrow night, and every night until you decide." He disappeared into the darkness. I stood in the doorway of my ruined cabin and understood finally what I had inherited. Not just property, a responsibility, a secret that needed keeping, or the hunger would consume everything. The sun rose over Bear Lake, indifferent to the horrors of the night. I sat on the porch watching the light change, trying to make sense of what my life had become. 3 days ago, I'd been eating cold pizza and drowning in debt. Now I was contemplating spending my remaining years feeding raw meat to something that used to be human. The door behind me was destroyed, the frame splintered. I would need to fix it before tonight. I thought about Tommy, Boy Scout, baseball fan. Now something else entirely. 25 years in a concrete room kept alive by hunger alone. I thought about Helen, the aunt I barely knew, who had given up everything to contain a secret that would have destroyed anyone else. And I thought about the choice in front of me. I could leave, drive away and never look back, let the county deal with whatever happened next. But Tommy had said it himself. The hunger would eventually make him forget that I was family. And when that happened, he would expand his territory, campgrounds, hiking trails, families with children, the bones in that concrete room, the small ones mixed with deer, the fragment of skull. Tommy had killed before, and if I walked away, he would kill again. I couldn't let that happen. The realization settled over me like a shroud. I wasn't going to leave. I was going to stay. That afternoon, I took Helen's rifle into the forest. I found a game trail leading to a creek where deer came to drink, settled behind a fallen log, and waited. 2 hours later, a young buck emerged from the tree line. I lined up the shot and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. The buck dropped. Dragging 150 pounds through thick forest took forever. By the time I reached the cabin, my entire body ached. I hauled the carcass to the basement, opened the steel door, shoved the deer into darkness. From the shadows I heard movement, breathing, then those eyes reflecting my flashlight from the far corner. "Thank you, Ryan." I closed the door and went upstairs. That night I made phone calls from town. First, my landlord. I wouldn't be renewing my lease. Second, the temp agency. I was relocating for family reasons. Third, Linda Chen. I was keeping the property. I drove back with a truck bed full of supplies, food, tools, building materials, everything I needed to make this place livable. Because I was staying. The first weeks were hardest. I fixed the front door, replaced hinges and frame, installed new deadbolts, though I knew they were useless. I cleaned out the freezers, made trips to the butcher in town, established a rotation. Every 3 or 4 days, I took meat down to that steel door. Sometimes whole deer if hunting went well, sometimes just quarters from the freezer. Tommy never showed himself during feedings. He stayed in shadows while I shoved meat through the doorway, but I could hear him breathing, see his eyes reflecting my flashlight. He stopped trying to enter the main cabin after that first week. He understood the arrangement. As long as food kept coming, he would stay in his room, stay quiet, stay hidden. We had an understanding. Earl visited about a month later. He pulled up in his old Ford and sat there a long moment looking at the cabin, looking at me on the porch with coffee in my hand. "Heard you were staying," he said as he climbed out. "Word travels fast. Small community. Not much else to talk about." He walked to the porch steps, but didn't climb them. "You know what you're getting into?" "Starting to figure it out. Helen managed it for 25 years. Kept that thing fed and quiet. Kept it from hurting anyone." "I know. It's not an easy life. Can't have visitors. Can't have relationships. Can't have anything that might put others at risk." "I know." He studied my face. "Why are you doing this?" I thought about the question. All the answers I could give. Practical ones about responsibility. Moral ones about protecting people. Financial ones about the property. But the truth was simpler. Because he's family. Earl's expression shifted. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Helen said the same thing. First year after she found him." He handed me a paper bag, coffee, sugar, preserves. You need anything, you know where to find me. I can't help with that. He nodded toward the basement. But I can help with everything else. That was 6 months ago. 6 months. I've gotten better at this life. Better at hunting, better at the isolation, better at the routine. Earl visits every few weeks, brings supplies, checks that I'm still alive and sane, never asks about Tommy, never mentions the sounds from the basement. Some things don't need to be spoken. I've read Helen's journal cover to cover multiple times, trying to understand what she went through, what she sacrificed, what she learned. She never found a cure, never found a way to reverse what happened. She just managed, day after day, year after year. Now that job falls to me. Some nights when the moon is full and the hunger is strong, I hear Tommy moving below, pacing, scratching at walls that have contained him for a quarter century. Sometimes he talks. That child's voice rising through the floor, speaking to no one, remembering things from a life that ended at 12. Baseball games, birthday parties, the smell of his mother's cooking. Fragments of a boy who doesn't exist anymore, trapped inside something that can never die. On those nights, I sit on the porch and watch the stars and wonder how long I can do this. How many years before isolation breaks me? How many decades before I end up like Helen? And when that day comes, who will take my place? This is my inheritance, my responsibility, my curse. But here's what keeps me awake in the small hours, what sends cold sweat down my spine. Tommy told me the thing found him in the woods, the thing that made him what he is. But he also said it had been hungry for so long, waiting, looking for someone to make into its vessel. Tommy wasn't the first. There have been others, maybe many others stretching back through centuries, people who wandered too far, people who got lost, people who encountered something ancient and hungry and wrong. If there have been others before Tommy, there might be others now, other vessels, other hungers. Other things wearing human faces, waiting in basements and caves and forgotten places. So if you're listening to this, remember something. The next time you're alone in a cabin in the woods and hear scratching in the walls at midnight, don't tell yourself it's just mice. The next time you're hiking and feel something watching from the tree line, don't tell yourself it's imagination. The next time you wake with certainty that something is standing in your room, don't tell yourself it was a dream. Because the woods are old, older than any of us, and there are things living in them that have been hungry since before humans built their first fires. Things that are always looking for their next meal. I feed one of them now. Every few days I take meat down to a basement room and feed a monster that used to be a boy. Somewhere out there in the darkness, I know there are others, waiting, watching, hungry. So lock your doors tonight, check the windows. Listen to what your house does after midnight. And if you hear something scratching in the walls, something that follows you room to room, something that knows where you are at all times, run. Because once the hunger finds you, it never lets go. Take it from someone who knows. Have you ever been alone in the woods and felt something watching? Have you heard sounds in old houses that couldn't be explained? What's the scariest legend from your hometown? Share your story. Because the next one I tell might come from your own backyard. And if you want to hear more, there are other secrets waiting, other cabins, other basements, other hungers that have never been fed. This is just the beginning.